this bear was not very far away, and I was really a little bit out of focus, but I managed to get a couple shots, and then I backed up. The last thing I want to do is disturb the bear's day. I want to watch it. I want to watch it for a long time, but I don't want to upset its balance.
Welcome to the Red, Green, Blue podcast.
All right. I'm here with Michael Rutter, who is definitely a Renaissance man. He is wildlife photographer, writer in so many different formats, including history, nature, and technical writing. I mean, just really an interesting, fascinating guy who's worked in film. He's been publishing since the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So he's just seen the whole transition we've all been through and is now on a podcast. So is now publishing in podcast land. So it's just really exciting to have him. He's also an amazing teacher. Should add that as well. So we're going to start off with just talking about a few of his photographs we have right here. What photograph here do you feel? I printed out some of his photographs, and we'll put cut to when the ones that he wants to talk about.
This one was done in Kodachrome, and I made it into a black and white print in 1981.
1981. That's a heck of a fish.
And I tweaked it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
just, Kodachrome was a slide film. That was like the slide film for like 70 years.
Yeah. And so it was, I was doing a trip to Alaska. I had returned. I was writing my first book. When I got out of graduate school, I said to my wife, I think I want to go to Alaska to write a book. And she said, let's go. And we did. And I went back and finished it. I never got it published because I didn't want to make the changes. I was encouraged by Edward Abbey, who I had met at a writer's conference and who was a very kind man. I don't know if people know Abbey anymore, but he wrote Desert Solitaire.
Oh, yeah. No,
yeah. Monkey Wrench Gang. And he was a very important environmental writer. And he was a really kind man. And he said, well, what are you doing? And I said, I want to go to Alaska. I just finishing my thesis, which was poetry. And he said, go. That's where I'd go.
Oh, yeah. What an adventure. Yeah.
And we talked, we both really liked rock art.
Oh, Richardson.
Yeah, and Abbey was just a really great writer. Desert Solitaire is still one of my favorite books.
Yeah, in fact, I saw on a list recently, there was a list of the best book to ever come from each state, and Desert Solitaire was the book from Utah.
So, Abbey was a poet.
Yeah.
And actually he had written some very interesting things before and even made some movies. I think one with Kirk Douglas. He was probably the Monkey Wrench Gang, probably is off topic, but was one of the first novels that really dealt with post-traumatic stress from Vietnam.
Really?
The character. Yeah. By the way, Hayduke, Doug Peacock, was his friend who became one of the great grizzly bear champions in the last 3 decades.
Oh, well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I mean, you would have been there for the whole environment, all the environmental movement in the 70s. And that's one thing I'm going to point this out right off. I've noticed like Ansel Adams and wildlife photographers, anybody, landscape photographers, they're really outdoorsmen first. And if you read Ansel Adams' biography and his writing, he really is kind of like hunting landscapes. I mean, because he's interacting with nature, he's exploring nature, and then he's capturing a landscape of Yosemite. But it's really a very similar process to hunting, I feel. So, yeah.
Yeah. What you're doing is you're looking for something, and then you're trying to capture it. In many ways, I explored this in the book. Notes from the High North, which I didn't publish. It's sitting at home. I published pieces of it, but it's how you capture beauty.
Yeah.
For someone that maybe is a hunter, they want to capture beauty by, and this is debatable, and I'm not advocating or not advocating, but shooting an animal and putting a head in your wall space somewhere is saying, oh, look, I appreciate this animal, where you and I might like to go out and watch it, and we probably want to take its picture.
Yeah,
but it's a way you capture the moment. Unfortunately, if you're taking a animal, you're capturing their moment and you've ended it.
Yeah.
But it's for me, it's these moments of beauty that I've been able to capture, and my favorite photos are my personal trophies. I look at them; they may not sell.
Yeah,
and in fact, they may not even be all that good. This one was, I have to say, I tweaked it quite a bit, but it was the first salmon that I had caught in Alaska on a fly.
Yeah. Oh,
in a
wow.
river about the size of the Provo River. It wasn't real big. And there were a lot of bears, and there were a lot of salmon, and there were a lot of rainbow eating salmon eggs. And I caught it, released it, but that was my first salmon. It was on the Cashwitna River in Alaska.
Yeah.
So
No.
it was a beautiful trip. It was very wet, and these old boots. You'd wear your running shoes on the trail, then you'd switch over to the wading boot, and then you'd change back, and then you'd get to the river, and then you'd fish, and you'd walk into a stream, and it was so clear you'd go up to your waist. Your boots would be wet, and but it was all good. It was that first real adventure, and I centered my book around those experiences.
Oh, yeah. No, and that's the thing. I mean, I think in a way, like I grew up in Utah, and so I think I kind of took nature for granted. And it wasn't until I lived in some big coastal cities and stuff for a while, and I came back, then I just couldn't get over it. And honestly, if you've never been to Alaska, I actually just went to Alaska the first time this last year, and like to see like where nature is winning civilization is there's really no parallel. There's no way to express it in anybody else. I feel Utah probably was like that maybe about 80 years ago, but Alaska, nature's winning, and it's definitely, we're just guests, and it's fascinating.
And the big mining disaster that could have happened has been at least mitigated. The Pebble Creek mine, which at least to my knowledge right now, is not going to go through, which would have threatened, some of the greatest spawning and salmon areas in the world. I feel that way, though. In 1975, I came to Utah to ski.
Yeah.
And when I first saw the Wasatch Mountains, I just knew I was never going back to Oregon. I would live here for the rest of my life. The Rocky Mountains are my home, my spiritual and my literal home.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it's really amazing. And again, like I tell people like from London or wherever, New York or something, that I live 15 minutes away from a ski resort. And they're like, no, that's not possible. I'm like, yeah, no, I do. We have deer in our front yard all the time. That's the way it is.
In fact, I saw some driving up.
Yeah. No, it's a good. They're there. Boy, sometimes I have something living in my garage I have to kind of shoo out. But anyway, so this bighorn photo is pretty impressive.
My wife is Sherry.
Yeah.
We've been married 48 years, and she can spot an animal on a hillside, and she needs glasses.
Yeah.
And she said, I think that's a bighorn up on the side of that peak. And I said, it is. And it was like 75 yards away. So I was shooting a Nikon camera at the time. I snuck down the creek, snuck up in back of it, and watched it for several hours. It's not a large bighorn, but it put on a great show. They can leap.
No, it's tremendous what they can do.
I didn't measure, but it seemed like 12 or 15 feet. Just from peak to peak. This was pretty high. This was actually in the Yellowstone ecosystem up near the northeast border.
Oh, neat. Yeah. So, yeah. No, and it's a kind of a thing in the West we have. In fact, I saw a graph recently and there's a line, it's roughly the Mississippi River, maybe a little bit more west than that. On one side of it is the east side of that line is 80% of the United States population. On the west side of that line is 20% of the population. So really, like, it's hard to describe, but like you can drive from Salt Lake City down to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and maybe pass through 200,000 or 300,000 population. And that's like a 10-hour drive, and again, it's really wonderful. It's just a joy to be able to live here and to experience that. So what about this picture of the bear? You're doing a big project on bears.
Yeah,
recently about them.
Bear have been my passion since they're my spiritual animal. Dogs, and I have to say I love cats too.
Yeah.
In fact, I probably shouldn't say this, but I judge people on how they treat their animals. If you don't treat your pets well, I try not to be judgmental, but I am. I'm working on a book. Well, it just turned into 4 books on bear behavior, and basically, aggression is the wrong term, but that's the term they use. Bear are very defensive. They live in a really interesting feudal social order, and I've been following bears since I was 5 or 6. In fact, I remember, I think when I was 6 years old, my father helped me track a bear for 300 or 400 yards in a creek bed where we were fishing. So it's been something I've studied all over. seen bears in most of the states, Alaska, Northwest Territories, Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and most of the time now I spend in the Yellowstone ecosystem or in the Idaho Panhandle.
Okay.
So this bear was just, I actually stumbled onto this one by accident, and you've probably had, Mark, this experience where you just hold your camera up and just pull a little trigger and hope you're in some sort of focus. This bear was not very far away, and I was really a little bit out of focus, but I managed to get a couple shots, and then I backed up. The last thing I want to do is disturb the bear's day. I want to watch it. I want to watch it for a long time, but I don't want to upset its balance. So my purpose, my trick is I'm pretty good with wildlife, but I don't want to disturb its feeding patterns.
Yeah.
It's a calorie game for a bear and for any animal. And so I want it to keep eating and not be stressed. And plus it's so much fun to watch it in its natural ecosystem. This one was a bit close. It was a pretty good sized bear, but it knew, and I feel like you can vibrate. I think I'm going mystic. Maybe it's too much poetry in my youth, but I think you can vibrate non-aggression.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work. And you never turn your back on a bear or a rattlesnake ever. But I think if you back up very carefully and you think non-aggression, I think the bear often can feel that unless you've frightened it or it's a mother with
you come up and surprise it. That seems what most of the problems have.
On a kill or on a carcass. Those are dangerous scenarios, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah. Well, have you had any scenarios like that?
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. But I'm really careful.
You're really careful.
I've rarely had. I've been predated. I started doing bears in 1964, 65. So I'm old. I'm really old. But I've had 3 or 4 what I would call dangerous predatory experiences in that time. And I have to say, how many bears have pulled a gun on me in my life? None.
Very few.
In fact, a couple of them were aggressive and a couple of them were predatory.
Yeah.
But other than that, I've not had a, knock on wood, I've not had a real dangerous experience. I've had some touchy experiences with grizzly bears, but I back up. It's the bear you don't see that you have to worry about.
Yeah, well, if you're mindful.
But if you see the bear, I never will go in and photograph the bear unless I feel like I control the scenario. And that means I'm not disturbing the bear's natural pattern.
Yeah.
But if you're fly fishing, and I fly fish a lot, you could walk around the corner of a stream or fish around a corner and be right into a bear with the stream noise and not know it. And that's where you need to back up. Bear will treat you the way they treat other bears.
Yeah.
And so that means you have to respond the way they expect you to respond. And that is not being afraid, back up, talk very low and back up. So I've really not had very many negative bear experiences, but I started really young. So I just learned about it as a kid. I grew up with bears in my yard.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And that's what I've observed with people. I mean, if you know what you're doing, you're not risking, you're fine. And the people who get into trouble, and this applies to any like skiing, and mountain biking, anything, are people who are complete noobs who haven't gotten guidance or somebody to help them for the initial learning stages, and people who are overly confident and neglectful. Those are the two people who get in trouble. Yeah. So like Grizzly Man, Werner Herzog documentary, which is great. He was neglectful and overconfident. Right?
And he was foolish.
Yeah, foolish. Yeah.
I feel bad for him, and I feel bad for the bear, but he did everything wrong. And if you know anything, I know he was a bear expert and he's kind of a folk hero, but he really demonstrated poor judgment. And if you look at the bears that he's with in those videos, you're going, this bear is not friendly.
Yeah.
And the bear is agitated and he's reading it wrong. And someone that knew what they were doing. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't get, one of my very good friends was attacked by a grizzly bear last year. He just stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. That can happen. But the grizzly man was, if you look at the bear's body language, they were agitated. And he was an advocate for bears, but in many ways he set bear science back.
Oh, really?
I think.
Oh, yeah. No, I think so. I mean, I think Werner in that documentary, he had a point.
Yeah.
I think his point was like, and this is something I've heard him talk about in interviews, is that there's kind of a thing that like nature's like your friend, and but your nature kind of doesn't care about you.
Well,
it doesn't.
it
doesn't have feelings.
It's indifferent.
It's indifferent. Yeah,
and so we have to treat it with great respect. And I think we can't confuse the fact that he loved the bears and he tried to defend them, but inadvertently, I like a lot of the stuff I've seen, so I appreciate where he's coming from. But he didn't make wise choices. And people that have animal experience would just look at him. I've read other books where people are looking at his video and they're breaking it apart, saying this bear was aggressive. He should have looked at this, and this. And you learn that after a while. In the same way that you're driving 70 miles an hour, if the traffic looks bad, when to slow down, when to stop. There's situational awareness that he was overlooking. Yeah. And that doesn't mean you won't stumble into a bad scenario. You could. But I was surprised that it didn't happen sooner, the tragedy.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, if you want to check that out, Werner Herzog's documentaries are great.
Yeah. Oh, I loved it.
Okay, so here's one of a wolf. What, do you fit this in Yellowstone as well?
Yeah, I was watching a big boar, grizzly bear, in April, the very 1st of April. And the bear had, one of the ways the bears put on a lot of calories in the spring, the boars come out first, is they will find a buffalo and other animals that have been frozen into the ice. And as the ice thaws a little bit, their smelling is, their scent, their olfactory is so remarkable that they can identify this. And so if you've been in the Yellowstone Park Blacktail Ponds, this buffalo, I have some other pictures many, in fact. I spent 10 days on this bear. The wolves came in when the bear walked out.
Oh my goodness.
So the wolves would come in, and this was shot at 15,000 ISO or something. I mean, it was shot really, it's real grainy, but the wolves would come in, and then as soon as the bear would show up, the wolves would back up. So the bear would jump on the ice, break the ice, take his mouth, and then rip the buffalo out of the ice, feed on it, and then he would be there every morning and every afternoon between daylight and 7:30, 8. It was like 5 degrees. It was so cold. And then the wolves would come in, and this wolf had come in and with others in its pack, and I watched him off and on, and it walked in front of me about 50 yards because it was walking around the bear.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and wolves are a new introduction to Yellowstone, relatively new. How long have they been there? About a decade?
95.
95.
Yeah.
Okay, for a few years.
And if you haven't heard a wolf howl, you really got to. A wolf howling at night is just a remarkable experience. Yellowstone is a good place. There's a lot of wolves in Idaho, in Montana too, but in Yellowstone you can hear them howl, and they're so much fun. They're really interesting, clever animals, and they'll sneak in back of the bear, and one will distract the bear, and then the other will come in and take a bite. But wolves have a really interesting social structure in their pack, and it's fun to watch the bear chase them off, and then another wolf will come in. Coyotes do the same thing, but wolves are working in a pack. This was one of 3 or 4 wolves I saw, probably 7 or 8 different days.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And they've read that they've completely reworked the ecosystem.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any observations on that?
Oh, yeah. There used to be people complain by saying, there's not as many elk. And that's true. The elk had practically eaten themselves out of house and home in the Yellowstone ecosystem. There were too many elk, and they were hurting the forests, but more particularly the riparian areas where they were eating the grass and the foliage so much that the water temperature was coming up. And wolves are controversial. I don't want to get into the wolf thing.
Yeah.
What they
Dostoevsky doesn't like him. Let's say that.
And by the way, he's got. And have you read Tolstoy about?
Oh, Tolstoy, yeah, Tolstoy. The Russian wolves are a big metaphor.
And I think the wolves are interesting.
Yeah.
But what had happened is it changed. There were so many elk, and there were no predators, and the elk were eating away at the ecosystem. And when wolves came in, and nothing is without an impact. There's a cause and effect for everything. But the wolves were able to reduce the populations And so the water temperature, and if you're a trout fisherman, you'll know that the fishing is actually probably a little better because the temperatures are cooler, and you don't see as many elk as you used to. But
but the vegetation is more
and the ecosystem is more balanced.
Yeah, well, because they were always meant to be there.
We're playing God with the ecosystem, and thank goodness we brought grizzlies back from the peak of Aru, and we brought wolves back. We brought antelope, deer. All the animals that we're seeing right now essentially were pretty much shot, not by hunters, but by market hunters and by habitat encroachment.
Yeah.
So a wolf is just, love them or hate them, but everybody loves to see them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and honestly, and we get dogs from wolves, and they're just part of our pack. And there are 7 species we've been able to domesticate because of their herd instincts.
Yeah.
And anyway, so we love them too. Yeah. And even if they're wild varieties.
I just find wolves to be just fascinating. Oh, that's one of my favorite bears you've ever.
Oh, is it? Let's talk about this.
Oh.
So there's another bear photo. So tell me about this one.
Oh my gosh. One of my favorite places in the world is the Tetons around Jackson Dam in the fall. And you can see bears close because they're eating, and what they're eating is a biscuit root.
Yeah.
And it's a tea biscuit or biscuit root. And people have eaten them, but they're digging them like crazy. You can, not in this shot, but in some of the shots, you can see that their faces are all red and dirty because they're digging this little root.
Yeah.
And they're digging by the thousands, and there's little holes where they've dug them, and it actually helps the root grow. And in times when there's not cattail roots and the water system is up or down, those biscuit roots are one of their favorite foods. In fact, the bears, I spent quite a bit of time in Yellowstone and in the Tetons.
Yeah.
And they were eating biscuit roots. It's one of their staples. It's a staple food. And this is one of the places where grizzly bears too, will be sharing. It's kind of a matriarchal system. A female like 399, if she okays it, will allow her daughters and granddaughters to come in and feed, as long as they're not getting too close and they're not endangering her food with their babies. Yeah. And it was these bears that were. There's a difference in habituation between being habituated to food and being habituated slightly to people. It's called tolerance.
Yeah.
You never turn your back on it, but these bears here, because of the nature of the ecosystem, and it's controlled by rangers, are more tolerant, and so you can get some good observation. I sit there with my Swarovski binos and my camera, and I'll sit for hours. And this day, I had seen 3 females with cubs within 300 yards.
Oh, man! And
it was foggy. They weren't great shots, but it was one of those picture moments that I look at, and it's not a picture I could sell or would want to, but I look at it and I think, oh, that was a great day. I'm drinking Postum out of my thermos. I'm sitting in my car. The heater is on. Every luxury under the sun. I'm eating, a 2-day-old egg McMuffin and watching bears and taking notes in my journal. It doesn't get much better.
What a privilege, Yeah. And bears, that's, in fact, this is a funny story. Like, it's quite difficult to find a bear, I feel. I mean, and when I was in Alaska, I went on a whale watching tour, which was fantastic. Oh. But anyway, there was a New Yorker girl there, and we were exiting the boat together, and she was asking the guide, like, hey, can you show me a bear now? And the guide's like, well, how long do you have? She's like, an hour. I'm like, no. And then where this expression comes from, I said, well, bears are a whole nother animal. Because they're just anyway. But again, like nature, I do think out in the world, again, this kind of like growing up in a wild place, I guess, and then going out, there's a view of nature that is a disconnect. I mean, nature's wonderful, but they're doing their thing, and they're not people. And
the secret is finding out. I spend a lot of time looking very carefully at what bear, elk, moose, and coyotes, foxes. I like to photograph foxes, what they're eating. And so with bears and other animals, I focus on their food.
Oh, yeah. Because they all have to eat. You go to a feeding area.
And so I'll look really hard at that. And that's the first thing I do. I spend a couple of days just looking at the available food supplies.
Oh, great.
And so this, I knew where this bear was. Raspberry and jam, for example, I saw almost every other day for hours and hours out just east of Yellowstone Lake this year. And I spent like almost 4 months, I think, off and on between Yellowstone and the Tetons. And I didn't see bear every day, but I saw a lot. I think 150, maybe 150.
Well, Yellowstone's a really great place for it. That's
but you focus on their food.
Focus on the food. Interesting.
And their migration.
Oh yeah. Well, this is a nice picture of an elk.
Oh, that was just, one of those serendipitous moments where you're driving someplace and you see a shot and you think, the sun's coming up. I think I'm going to pull over, but if I do, I might not see a bear. But this was near Mormon Flats in the Tetons.
Okay.
And by the way, that picture is the bear on ice that was eating the buffalo. That was chasing.
So this is the bear one.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But this is not a large elk, but really magnificent animal, and it was just sitting there about 150 yards away, waiting for the sun to come out, get warm, and it had been. It wasn't successful in its jousting for the ladies. It would be what we'd call a satellite bull, big, but not big enough to have breeding rights. And he was a little disappointed.
Yeah, I bet. So here's some great pictures I wanted to show of him out in the field. There, what is that? The lens you like?
Oh, that yeah, and
that the Sony 600 millimeter f4.
That is probably. I love Nikon and I shot it for years, but I fell in love with the Sony and I fell in love with this lens first.
Yeah,
because you marry the lens. At least I do, and because I keep them for a while. But I was not sure what I was going to do, and a fellow said, "I'm really sick to my stomach. I need to get these shots. Will you take my camera and will you shoot these while I go back to my cabin and camp?"
Yeah.
And he said, and I met him often. I didn't know his name, but you know how you get in tight when you're out there with someone.
Oh yeah, you're just amazed you see somebody else.
Yeah, this is somebody that
you meet somebody on a road in
Montana,
you'll be the best friends, and as soon as you pass.
And he said, "Take this camera, and I'll give you the pictures you shoot if you let me have them too." And I said, "Oh wow, I get to shoot a Sony A1 with the f4 600," and it's not the most expensive lens, but it's a pretty expensive.
Oh no, that's pretty expensive. It's like $14,000.
It's something like that, yeah. And I think the body was, I don't know,
it's 5 or 6,
six-ish, yeah. But I shot it, and he came in and he goes, "Come on over." And I went over and he gave me the pictures that I'd shot, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, I've never shot this camera," and I mostly shot it on autofocus because I didn't know the Sony ecosystem, but I looked at it and I thought, okay, I talked to you. Remember, I called you, and then I talked to a friend, Colin Bigelow, and George Fry, who are both wonderful photographers. And I said, "What about this? This is what I want." And they both said, "Oh, that Sony you'll love it." And so I bought it, and it's just a camera that's exceeded my expectation. And the sizzle is not as good as the performance, at least for me. That's just me. I know people, I have friends that would live and die for Canon and Nikon and Pentax, and certainly it worked for me.
Yeah, well, Sony, I mean, it's high, especially the A1's high frame rate. It's 50 megapixels. It really is. And also,
this lens is pretty darn crisp.
Oh no,
and it's light. It's a light lens.
Well, no, that's the thing for outdoors. I've actually noticed a lot of outdoors people are using Sony because Canon, they build their cameras more rugged, but they're heavier.
Mm-hmm. I just insure them. I pay a lot of money.
Oh no, and the Sonys are plenty rugged, but Canon, you can take a Canon, R3 or R1 and literally kick it, and it'll be fine. Mm-hmm. Or you could throw it across. It's meant to be in the the White House press room, kind of really brutal.
But that is,
and it's over designed. But but Canon A1s, I own a rental company, and we don't have them break. And they're used, but the Sonys, they're fantastic.
And for me too, I can shoot it. I have to say, it took me. I'm not real bright. It took me at least a half a year to learn it, where I was really feeling comfortable. But I love the monopod, but I can shoot it handheld.
Yeah.
I keep it on my lap. I also have a couple other Sony lenses that are real fast, but this is the one that I carry with me.
Mhm.
And I guess you're a wildlife photographer when you wrap it in a Ziploc bag and wrap it around a couple down vests and throw it in your backpack.
Oh, there you go. It's like your point and shoot.
Yeah.
That is something.
Now this and it worked well for me. But this one, I'm standing right at Yellowstone Lake. I'm actually watching Jam, one of the famous bears.
Yeah.
And this is one of the few shots. I asked a friend to take a few shots, and he took them in front of the bathroom.
Oh, really?
And this is one of the few that doesn't have the big outdoor
bathroom.
toilet right there.
It goes to show, it looks like he's just standing in the middle of wild, but he's right next to the toilet.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's a big advance I've noticed since I've been a photographer for, I guess, about 20, 25 years. And like back then, like a lens that size, it would take both hands to pick up. They were heavy.
It would be, well, I think the f2.8 is still 30. I haven't looked at it, but it's 25 or 30 pounds, isn't it?
Oh, the new ones, no, they're all...
Well, the last time, this was 5, 6, 8 years.
Oh yeah, no, they're heavy. They were heavy lenses. I remember I had a 300 2.8 that the Deseret News gave me. It was like, and it was old school because I was like a young photographer, and it was manual focus, and that thing was heavy.
Well, I don't know how we did it, but I started with Pentax and Nikon manual, and we just manual focused everything. And now I don't. Do you still manual focus a lot? I do.
Well, I shoot with a Leica still, and Leica lenses use they still use manual focus, so you can use the whole history of lenses.
Oh,
but yeah, no. When I started out photography, I would sit and I'd practice focusing between 3 zones, and it was a real athletic skill you had to have.
And then you'd bracket up, and you'd bracket you bracket up and down on the shutter speed. You'd bracket up and down on the the lenses, and
because you never knew exactly what you're getting. I mean, the fact that you can see the picture,
it was
on the
just
back.
A meter.
Yeah, just a meter, and
a light meter.
You could never really tell what you're actually getting until you developed the film, which was kind of exciting drama, but at the same time,
you didn't know if you were going to have a good trip or not until you got back.
Well, yeah, especially if you're shooting for like a newspaper.
Yeah,
you're like, shoot.
Yeah, I would say I sold the magazine article, and they say it's predicated on the pictures, and I'd get back and I'm going, oh my gosh, there's 3 that worked. I did everything right. And so I'd have to go back and reshoot it because you sell in those days. Remember when we had hard copy magazines?
Yeah, hard
newspapers
magazines,
where I started.
subscriptions.
And
people probably don't know.
Yeah,
if you're under age 25.
You didn't sell the article if you didn't have the photo support. You had to have the photo support.
Oh yeah, no, it's a package. I mean, you really just selling a whole story, and they don't want it. They want to solve the problem.
Yeah,
So no, if you had both, you had.
And you can fix a bad text. You can't polish a bad picture at least in those days.
Oh yeah. Well, and also, I mean, getting a photograph. I mean, when I worked for Getty, that's kind of what we actually did. Is we were contracted by major media organizations to kind of because you can write an article using a phone, telephone, or the internet. But you know what? If you want a picture, you got to have a picture.
Yeah.
So the inauguration is going to be happening soon, and I can tell you there's going to be a ton of photographers there taking pictures of the inauguration because there's no substitute to having somebody taking the picture
and having your finger on the trigger. That when Trump was unfortunately
the assassination
shot and he came down, and the person that was in low that had his finger on the trigger, I'm sure he must.
No, that's an amazing photograph.
It's the
only one, and that's one of the best. Even people who don't agree with Trump's politics say that is one of the best. Yeah, to say that's one of the best. The guy who took it, coincidentally, he even said in interviews like, "I'm super liberal, but man, that's a good photo."
Right, and that's where
it's one of the best photos of the decade.
Oh, without a doubt, and just like sports photos too. That last pass of the Super Bowl or whatever, and that's where our friend George Fry.
Oh yeah,
is such a wonderful sports photographer. He just knows. It's the time you put the camera down because your hand hurts, that the action happens in the bear moves, or in this case, the bear will move again, but you're not going to get.
No, you remember all the photos you miss. Yeah. But no, to me, that's an interesting thing. Especially a lot of the people viewing this podcast will work in film and photography, or just film or something. And since I've worked with both, it's like the static image, and you get that with the Trump assassination photo or a good sports photo. It just freezes that moment, and it's just. An example I like to use is there's a Far Side cartoon where they're playing tetherball with a cat. It's called Tether Cat.
Mhm.
And that's the cartoon the Gary Larson got the most complaint letters about. And he's like, it's weird because animals in my cartoons are generally doing things. And like a Garfield and all these other things, Snoopy goes through all sorts of stuff. But he says, I think it's because it was one frame, is static, and the cat is just frozen as a tether cat. And I think, so that's the power of still photography. It's like that Trump photo is, he's always just recovering. There's no resolution. In a video footage of the same event, there's resolution, so stress is released and stuff. And so same thing with sports, same things with action.
The JFK assassination, too. Some of those shots, they're unfortunate and it's very tragic. But it does capture that moment in time, and it's like a miniature short story.
Yeah, well, and it says that impact of that is frozen in time. Another good example of that, there's a very famous photograph from the Vietnam War of the guy executing the communist Vietnamese, the American allied Vietnamese executing a communist. And there's actually 16 millimeter footage of that same event, but it's not famous because it's just frozen in time.
Yeah. See, that was my generation. I was a Vietnam baby.
Oh, yeah.
I was... Well, that's so.
Yeah, no, and again, and that's that's power of print media.
I was a hippie.
Yeah, well, I mean, there were photographs. Again, this might people who grew up with social media and stuff not be aware of this, but during the print media, before the internet, there were photographs that just everybody would see. I mean, they would just get part of the social consciousness. It was like beyond going viral. Like literally everybody would see that photograph and you could bring it with anybody. And I don't know if we have similar things like that anymore.
It forms kind of our collective consciousness too, as a culture, when we look at moments like that and we isolate them. And I think that's what was so interesting about some of those shots. And more power to the person that had their finger on the trigger and it was in focus, especially in the days when you had to focus by hand.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, having the presence of mind and being not reacting. In fact, was it Jim Noctaway? He's a major war photographer for Time magazine.
Oh,
yeah, he's huge. And I heard him say at a lecture once is that of course it's an emotional experience being around this kind of stuff, but like that doesn't do anybody any good if I cry. So I just stay focused and try to channel that energy into my photography. And I think that's why a lot of good photography does come out of those moments. Because people are just like really dialed in. And if you're a good photographer, like the Trump assassination, just as a recent one, I mean, I bet there's a lot of people who haven't seen that photo because we don't like have mass media. Google it. It's fascinating. But that photographer has done this long enough and shots are being fired, chaos is around him, and he's still just presence of mind and gets the shot. And that's a rare person who can do that.
And you're when shots are fired, that's got to be a scary moment.
Oh, yeah. You'd like run for cover. Yeah, that'd be like the first instinct.
Yeah.
And people literally were dying. There's a guy who died right behind him during that moment. Yeah. So anyway, wildlife photography. So this is 2 elk. Speaking of just getting that moment,
moose, actually.
2 moose. Sorry,
well, but
that's anobviously a moose horn.
Yeah,
there you go.
So that's these
bullwinkle.
These are also bulls that didn't make it into the big dance.
Okay,
and so they are very angry with each other. And they're fighting. This is post-rut, but they still have a lot of testosterone. And we were a good friend of mine, Von Phillips, and I. We photograph a lot together. And he's a Canon guy.
Yeah.
And lived and died Canon, and is a wonderful photographer. And we managed to just accidentally stumble into a couple of moose, and they were fighting each other. But they've been kicked off by a very large, famous bull in the Teton ecosystem. And they were ready to go at it, and they would hit each other really hard, and you could hear them knock for a quarter of a mile. And we both had pretty good lenses, and so we just stood there and watched. And they were this was just when the dawn just turns everything sort of that pale pink.
Oh, it's the best time.
And it was the wonderful golden hour, and it was an exciting moment. And then one of the now you got me saying it. One of the moose had seen Vaughn and kind of came over, and he got behind a tree. We were a very healthy distance, but he was just looking for a fight.
Yeah, well, you can correct me on this, but wildlife photography is best to do in the morning, right?
Yeah,
because the animal's more active, and you don't have a lot of dust in the air if you're like in a dusty
this
environment.
Was at the crack of dawn, and you just get a kind of a special glow. Yeah, and this was that pink. I don't know what, it's just light enough to be light, but you have that wonderful saturation. And you just live for that moment.
Yeah, well, the
I need an
sky
animal
becomes your
right
big
there.
light
Yeah,
source, and it's
yeah,
big, broad. Yeah, golden hour. Yeah, in fact, there's
Yeah.
one director who shot a whole movie in the golden hour. His name bases
Ooh.
on me, but
Yeah.
he would only shoot for an hour a day, and he shot over a month because he just wanted nothing but golden hour. Isn't that amazing? It's amazing he could get the producers to do that.
And I would love to do that, but unfortunately, at some point you have to make a living, and animals do not want to cooperate with you necessarily like they.
Exactly, they're doing their
studio.
thing.
Yeah,
they don't know you got a deadline.
Yeah, those. Remember those? I sorted out not millions, but thousands of slides and thrown them out. And
yeah, no, I wanted to include this photo because I think people, again, if you got in photography post digital, the logistics of film and just the mass you create. Like I have binders and binders full of negatives, and it really kind of becomes a lot, and now you just have
like
hard drives.
What of 10 drawers? 8 or 10 drawers in those days, and you just shoot a lot. It was expensive.
No, it was expensive too. Like when I was starting out photography, like getting film was a real struggle.
We took 10 rolls of Kodachrome to Yellowstone in a week would be a really expensive trip when I was still a graduate student. Yeah, and you'd shoot when you could, but you'd still have to. Correct me if I'm wrong, you understand, but color baths, if you get a quarter of a temperature degree off when you're doing the film, especially with Kodachrome, you screwed it up.
Yeah.
And so now these were like Fuji, and they'd be an E6 run. But these you paid a lot just to get them.
Yeah, because there was only like 6 labs that could handle it. It was so complicated. Kodachrome was like the first real stable color process. And in fact, there's a famous Paul Simon song called Kodachrome.
Kodachrome.
Yeah, they're good about that.
Yeah.
Well, hey, how about this one about this owl?
Oh my gosh. The owl I just asked it to smile, and it just put its eyes together and went to sleep. And it just sort of has that natural smile, but that was done probably 15 years ago.
Yeah, no, that's a nice photo.
that was a I'm not sure which, it was a Nikon, but it was a wonderful owl.
Yeah.
I still remember it.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm sure. And to me, that's a unique thing about photography is the type of photography thing you photograph really determines a lot of your experiences. Like if you're a war photographer, you're going to see a lot of war.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're a nature photographer, you're going to see a lot of nature, a lot of wildlife, landscape, a lot of landscape. And, so you kind of, again, it kind of shapes you as a person. Whereas like I have friends in my visual art life who, paint, and I, respect for them, but they kind of just walk into a room in their house and paint. Whereas like I have this whole like adventure, and like even getting to the place where I can begin to photograph is half the job,
And this is a dangerous moment right here. That's a sign of absolute stress. Yeah. When an animal, a bear like that yawns, somebody had walked in really close, and that is the first sign of agitation and possible aggression. That's a grizzly bear. See how long its tongue is. That yawn is not boredom. That is a sign of agitation and stress. And another bear would read that and say, "Oh, that bear is stressed. I'm going to back up."
But a human might think, "Oh, he's tired." Right?
Yeah. And when they're licking, they're usually licking their nose. Animals, when you see them lick a lot, that's how they confirm this. They're olfactory. But this was a dangerous scenario, and the person thought, "Oh, the bear is cute. It's yawning." Well, it's a grizzly bear. You're 30 yards away. It's probably not a good idea. And if you get attacked, you've just paid for my entire summer and a whole new set of cameras.
No, that is a funny thing, though. I mean, that's an irony about photography is that, in a way, you're kind of wanting something to happen.
But you didn't want to see.
No, you don't.
You wanted the bear hurt, but I'm thinking to myself, and when what's the good angel? And it's the good angel, the bad angel. I'm going, the good angel is get him out of there, yell and scream. The bad angel is going, okay, you're focused, you're ready to go. When that bear moves, you just on the motor drive.
Well, social media has, really, it's like, you'll see video footage of stuff. It's like, wait, why aren't you helping? But it's one of those ethical dilemmas. That's something we discuss. Oh, then I wanted to talk about this picture. You got a picture of Willie Nelson there.
That is actually not mine.
Oh, it's not yours.
No,
okay.
I wish it was.
Fine.
But I liked it so much that I didn't print it. I took it, and I like Willie Nelson. I can't believe both of these two men are alive. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I exercise every day. I had a heart attack 13 years ago. I work out, and I think they've done every chemical under the sun. I love their music.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, this is the absolute antithesis of healthy living, but go guys.
No,
So,
exactly.
No, I wanted, but I took the picture and I just have it on my desk and underneath it says, go exercise.
Go exercise.
Yeah,
to go
yeah.
live. No, and also, I mean, I think part of their mad secret is that they handle stress well. I mean, I don't know.
And,
I mean, you can see that in their, they have kind of a carefree attitude.
Yeah, and I think they make it look flippant, but both take their music really seriously.
Yeah, and that's something you can keep you going.
Yeah. So,
keeping engaged.
Yeah.
And then, that's, what is it? Paul Simon in his Rock and Roll Hall of Fame acceptance speech, he was like, music is wonderful because I've never been bored.
Yeah.
Because I've always had something to work on.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about a couple of your books here. So we got Colorado Madams, which is prostitution, right? Right.
Yeah. I've actually done 3 books on it, and
this is the original pimp.
I didn't want to, I didn't want to do these books.
Yeah.
And I had written a book called The Outlaw Tales of Utah.
Yeah.
And I called my editor and I chatted with her and I said, man, I am so upset with the stuff I'm reading. They're making prostitution just look like it would be I love the Redford Newman film of Butch Cassidy.
Oh yeah.
And the Sundance Kid. It's just not like that. Because I have a degree in history and English too, my undergraduate degree. And I've just read too much history and this is so wrong. And she said, why don't you do a book on prostitution? And I said, well, I teach at BYU. I'm on it G-rated. And she goes, make it G-rated. So I talked to a good friend of mine, Phil Snyder. I don't know if you know.
Oh, I do know him. Yeah. He married my next door neighbor. Yeah.
Oh, well, right.
Growing up to Lease.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love them. And we've actually done some callings together. Anyway, I said, he was the chairman of the English department. And I said, if I give you this book and I do this, and he said, oh, you need to write it. And I said, would you feel okay about redlining anything you didn't think was appropriate? Because I'm a G-rated kind of person, I mean, I just am. And he said, okay. And so I did, and it was pretty.
No, it's fine.
It was pretty successful. And then that's what led me. And then I did a book called Wild Bunch Women about the girlfriends of the Wild Bunch. And that's what led me to the
Butch Cassidy.
The Butch Cassidy, the A&E thing. And I'd done a couple others. But this one is so interesting. I mean, admittedly, I'm a little biased, but these lives were not happy lives. They're pretty tragic, but you can't.
Well, I mean, it was life, and it's something.
It was life.
It was much more brutal back then.
You can't be a greeter at Walmart in the 18th century.
No.
Women were looked at in black and white. You were the good or bad. That first look, and so I tried to do it realistic. I tried to write the stories, and there's so much mythology that's so wrong.
Yeah,
I tried to collect it, and it's like on the internet, you'll read the same story 50 times.
Yeah, and
so I went in and I tried to tell the story a little more appropriately. But by the way, I think my essays that open both of these are the best I've ever written. I will just say that. Though rarely am I ever pleased with my work.
Yeah,
I'm really pleased with those.
Oh,
but
for me, it's like whenever I go look back at my work, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's not so bad, But then it gets worse in my brain the longer I'm away from it. And I'm like, oh wait.
I spend as much time on the introductions, which were 3 or 4 pages, as I did on maybe a chapter, because I just wanted to balance it so much in my head. But I wanted to just talk about it. So they've been pretty successful.
Right.
But they led me into some other things. I'll pick up Outlaws again, but I love that Butch Cassidy area where he lived. That that Utah desert, the Red Rocks. That's Edward Abbey.
Oh yeah.
And so that was interesting. This book too, I was real happy.
Well,
with,
Butch Cassidy is such a fascinating
he's a
character.
Charismatic. Interesting. Oops, that's your pen.
No, that's fine.
Mine's a cartridge or a fountain pen.
Oh wow, fancy.
Yeah, well, it's when you're a
writer, you have good tools.
A pen. I pens for moods. I have like 10 or 20 different fountain pens in whichever mood I'm in, whatever color I want.
No, that's great.
Yeah. But so those are interesting. But for me, I've just never made that separation between text and photo.
Oh yeah,
it's that line is so blurry. It's both story and it's instruct, delight. It's artistic, it's teaching, it's didactic. Well, we talked about this, but I grew up in a world where you had to have clear images to sell your text, and you have to have text to sell your images.
Yeah.
And so I've done both, but I love them equally. I take copious notes. I'll write 20 or 30 pages of notes, and I'll shoot 1,000 frames a day, at least when I'm bear watching. Set up on my car. Oh, sometimes more. I probably overshoot, but
yeah. Well, again, it's like, to me, it's all about ideas. I mean, I see, like, I work in still photography. I work in film. I mean, I've done feature films. I've done books, and I've written.
You've done it all.
No, I mean, you've done it all too. Of course.
But not film. I'd love to do film. I think, but I still fundamentally, I think we mentioned this earlier, right? I view myself as a classically trained poet and a black and white photographer. Those are my favorite genres, but I still love them all. I can't turn away from a photo gallery or an art gallery.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really comes down to being all about ideas, right? And the best way you can communicate those ideas. And there's words are really great about, you wouldn't want a film about the United States Constitution. You want the United States Constitution because you need that kind of preciseness going on. And, but at the same time, if you didn't have, if you didn't have video footage of the Kennedy assassination, there'd be no way to communicate that moment through words. Yeah. And, that's something, and you think about all the events, like we don't have video footage of the Lincoln assassination or stuff that happened before video. And so it just gives impact, the video has, and then still photography, as we talked about previously, same thing. Every medium has its strengths and weaknesses, and it's fun to work between, with the strengths and not against the weaknesses.
I think so. And one of the wonderful things is we all learn so differently. I remember one person said to me, if we hand planners out to every student, they'll all have their assignments in on time. Well, that presupposes a lot of things, but that's not true, because we all learn differently and we all process differently. And many of us process visually, many of us process via text, but I think we process the best when we have both.
Oh, yeah.
And art, the genre of art, the genre of writing, symbolist French poetry or sonnets or whatever. I mean, we have different specifics, but learning especially is facilitated by the visual and the written. At least, and I'm probably making a judgment, but at least for me, I think that's always been the best way where I can reinforce it visually and with the word. And when it comes down to it, visual is in and of itself a story. And you can kind of direct that maybe or not. Let somebody just have their imagination and let them go. I mean, I'm not going to tell you how to think at a black and white gallery.
Yeah.
I just want you to go in and think. I just want you to this.
It's just slipping off a bit.
No, well, no, it's. But those are some of the most interesting things, I think, in that we just learn so many different ways. And why limit yourself? Yeah. And that's one of the fun things I think too about what we do is, whether you're a filmmaker or a writer or a photographer, still photographer, whatever, it's we're engaging people in thinking and learning and imagining. And it doesn't matter if it's technical writing or poetry or black and white or color or what sort of avant-garde, whatever you're doing, we're engaging people.
Yeah, well, no, you're engaging, you're educating them about their world and, making them a stronger, better person.
A picture of an elephant. You can talk all day about elephant deforestation in Central Africa, but I can show you 10 pictures, and then it's gonna mean so much more when I write about it.
Oh yeah, no. In fact, and that's the thing. Actually, we talked about trophy hunting, killing animals to stuff and bring here. But before photography, like when that was a big way. The only way you'd ever see a rhinoceros, you wouldn't see a photograph, is somebody, you'd have to go to a museum where they had a stuffed rhinoceros, And,
or Auden, he went, shot every bird he could find.
Yeah. So you could have a physical specimen.
In that. So, yeah.
Yeah, no. And that's what, what's his name? Theodore Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt. He did a big expedition to Africa, and it was for the Smithsonian to collect specimens for their exhibits. But again, like with photography, we can see them move, we can see them live, with film. we can get we maybe even just take it for granted, particularly.
Well, and I think in even with our phones, we can get some amazing videos, some amazing shots. And what we've done now is I think we've just opened up the world. And what happens is we can see places and imagine things we've never seen because of the medium. Yeah. Well, whatever. But we have so many opportunities now. And, I just applaud everyone working in any direction. I mean, I love film. I love video. There's not a genre out there I think I don't like.
No, of course. Like, I mean, they're all making the world. I mean, they're all really, especially, and of course, communicating about the human condition, telling us we're not alone. I mean, poetry, right? Of course, that's a big part of that.
And in this book, the mythology that we've learned, what we've thought of as myth, we've translated into culture and history, and it's not. Yeah. And so this is like an example of where we've taken the mythology and we've created the cultural history, and it's not correct. I think we can have both. We can have Greek mythology. It's wonderful. I grew up on Greek mythology, but it's not Greek history.
Of course, yeah.
And so I think that's one of that is a possible danger. But
the West. Yeah. I guess I don't know if this is an apocryphal story, but I heard like the concept of the cowboy, because cowboys were really kind of migrant.
Created in
they're
the
migrant
West,
workers, right?
Not in the West. I mean, yeah, cowboys were traditionally, many of them were Black, Latino, Native American, and the cowboy life has been romanticized by New York print.
Yeah. Well,
and like Calamity Jane, there's nothing very happy about her life. Yeah. For example, or you take the Texas Rangers, for example. But I mean, we love Lone Wolf McQuaid and this, but the Texas Rangers had the best press in history. Yeah. But they were actually a racial instrument of segregation.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, without a doubt. And so we have the mythology of the Texas Ranger, and it's wonderful. I love it. I love that cowboy mythology, but that's not how it really happened. And I'm saying it's okay to have both, but don't confuse those. And that's one of the things in my essay, I think, as I set this up. That I want to make sure that people that look at that. Somebody called me, a good friend, and she goes, "You've just ruined Wyatt Earp." and I said, "Why?" I thought Kurt Russell was wonderful in the movie, and I said I thought he was too. It was wonderful, but it wasn't historically accurate. It was great. He is the Wyatt Earp in our mind. Yeah. He is Wyatt Earpness, right? But that's not the real Wyatt Earp.
Yeah,
the real Wyatt Earp was kind of a jerk, and he liked to hit people, and he was mean, and he was hired by basically towns to enforce their stuff. But that's how sheriffs were. It's not the Wyatt Earp of the movies, just as John Wayne isn't. I mean, we love John Wayne, right? And we love Westerns, but that's not the history. That's not real. Yeah. That's the mythology, in the same way that we love the Iliad, the Odyssey, and we love those Greek myths. I just grew up on them, but I'm not going to confuse Odysseus's journey with Greek civilization. I mean, it's connected mythologically, but it's not real. Oh yeah, it's myth history, and that's the one danger of I think of digital immediacy. That there's no, when you and I grew up back in the olden days,
before the internet,
you couldn't, if you wrote an article, and we both wrote for newspapers and stuff, somebody edited it to make sure you didn't just write it real quick and push the button, boom, and it's gone. There was a filter. Yeah. And there's not a filter now. And so stuff that maybe isn't accurate.
And there's reputations on the line beyond your own reputation.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that's the interesting thing. But in the end, it's all good. We're better off for having a wide spectrum.
Yeah, I think it's really working out for some people, and then some maybe for not. But whatever it is happening, and you're not going to put it back in a bottle.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
So. Yeah. Yeah, no, one thing, like, if you look, to me, you can give me your opinion on this, that, like, if you look at, like, John Wayne and Shane and all these iconic cowboy characters, they're really kind of like the knights of the West.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like, you think of them like kind of like in fantasy fiction, what a knight does, what Aragorn does. same thing. You know,
Well, and it's certainly the cowboy life was not. You get up in the morning and you look everything and you go out and pet the horse and you have cowboy logic, and it was a really rough,
hard job at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, most cowboys did not even own their own horse.
Yeah, really
it was poor, and so we've created a wonderful mythology, and it's been confused via Hollywood, but that's where we get Clint Eastwood as the anti-hero.
Yeah, well, the reluctant knight.
Yeah. And so it wasn't the Shane kind of character.
Yeah. One thing, I mean, I don't know, you can have an opinion. My vague impression is that like the Civil War ended and there were all these guys with PTSD and they kind of went out west and killed each other. And like, well, we're fine. They didn't want to go back to the farm, because they had been 4 years at war. Particularly, I mean, Southerners who they wouldn't have gotten a pension because they lost the war and a lot of other difficulties. And so they really didn't have much option other than to go out west and try to make a living.
And the Homestead Act made it a very...
I mean, you can contradict me on that, but that's just
I think you're right, but it was a place to start over.
Exactly.
And, Frederick Jackson Turner's Frontier Thesis essay, which it's come into conflict, but it's still an interesting place to start where we could keep moving west.
Yeah.
And so... we have a history of moving west. We wear out the land and then we move on. Yeah. I think you could just say the same thing.
Well, and also the railroad was invented during that time, and that made it a lot easier.
But it was a place to start over. But certainly the Civil War was.
I mean, it's so cataclysmic, so brutal,
tragic.
So tens of thousands of people involved in it, and just
and I mean, Mark Twain left and went west.
Yeah,
he was such an interesting character.
Yeah,
but he was so conflicted by the brutality of it. I don't know how you'd not escape post-traumatic stress on meth.
Geez, yeah. I mean, the way they fought that war, lining up and shooting each other, with way too advanced firearms for that kind of warfare.
Yeah, we're starting to use Napoleonic techniques with Gatling guns.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And so... But we did it certainly moved a lot of people. Good man. I mean, we had to kill the buffalo because the Native Americans needed them. And so the quickest way to get the land was to corral not only animals, but humans.
Oh, yeah.
So,
which again is very complicated. But again, it was a brutal time. It's easy to go look back and judge.
And if you were living back then, you'd be shooting every wolf and every bear in sight because you couldn't afford to lose a lamb.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And buffalo would... You couldn't keep them fenced. We look at it now. We have to look at history in context, and we have to look at life in context. And I think art gives us that opportunity, and I think good journalism does that. But certainly, we can't look at it with our filters.
Yeah, well,
very effectively.
Well, yeah, I think because we live in so much abundance.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know what it's like. I know what it's like to get up in the night and defend my chicken coop.
Yeah,
I grew up on a farm. And my dad said, we're going back to nature. And we grew many of our own things. And we raised animals. We butchered them. We lived. We ate deer.
Yeah.
But he was a doctor. But he chose to live that lifestyle. And so I get a glimpse of it. But in the end, we could always jump in a very expensive truck and drive into our favorite restaurant.
Yeah, it existed. You can see it's like, I mean, I think people, like if you adjusted, people were living on just our equivalent of like a few $100s a year.
Oh, yeah. And people where I lived were still selling gold when it was $32 an ounce on the black market. They were still making moonshine. They were still poaching and living on deer, and they would log 3 or 4 months a year when they could get a job, and they lived off the land. And we didn't have to, but so I grew up at the tail end of that kind of culture. So there were kids we lived on Galls Creek in Southern Oregon, and there were people that were still living like that. But it was cheaper to live out in the country. You could buy land and you could live on it.
Yeah.
And then as soon as the 70s came in, the stills were translated into marijuana.
Oh yeah. Well, that's funny.
And you take
it's more profitable.
The water from the streams, and you'd kind of dam it up, and you'd kind of work it into the marijuana patches, which were grown in between trees and logging.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So
So anyway, can we talk a bit
Yeah.
about like your wife's influence on you? We
Oh,
talked
my
about,
wife, Sherry, she just, when I was in the second grade, I told my teacher, I want to grow up. I want to marry a beautiful woman who likes cats and dogs and bears and live happily ever after. And she goes, oh, welcome to the fairy tale. And I said, well, no, I think. And so I basically, I've had that, but fortunate, lucky. And, but Sherry has been really supportive. She put me through 10 years of school, maybe 8.5, but give or take a lot. But when I decided I wanted to write, she got a second job so I could quit one of my jobs. And she goes, okay, now I'm making more money than you can make, because she was a mental health worker.
Yeah.
And she said, you can write two nights without any interruption.
Oh, that's so generous. That's amazing.
And it, literally, I have rolls, when you used to like put plastic, you take, paper.
Yeah.
I have 30 feet of rejection slips that are what do you call it?
No, that's the way to do it.
And when I did writing seminars, I would say, this is my first year, and I just roll it out. And I just lived from rejection to rejection, trying to learn the trade. But Sherry believed in me, and that's what worked. And then all of a sudden I started breaking through here and there, and it worked.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
So,
Stephen King, he's got a great story. He put a nail on the wall and he said, my goal is to fill up this nail with rejection letters.
Oh my gosh. I have files, but
Yeah.
I've kept them all. And
that's
many
a smart
were
thing
just
to do.
doing the wrong things, because
It's a mismatch. I mean,
I didn't
honestly,
major in journalism or photography. I just sort of, I just grew up and I said, I think I'm going to be a writer. And then one day I said to Sherry, I'm going to write. And she said, okay. And I just did. I just said, I'm a writer now. And I've got all the rejection slips to prove it.
Yeah.
But it's been a really good living. And photo I've always kind of done. But then I wanted to dive into that. I had a professor in college before I started graduate school. And he said, you've got to learn how to do photos if you want to do the writing. And he was...
No, and honestly,
your mom knew him pretty well.
Oh, really?
John S. Harris. And he was a wonderful mentor.
Yeah.
And so my interest was poetry and creative writing. And he was also a technical, well, we'd call it technical writing, be technical communication. So I sort of went in both degrees concurrently.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, honestly, to me, like the way I got into photography was I was writing a column for the regional paper, and I just realized I didn't want to be in front of the screen all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started hanging out with the photo department, because I was like, oh my goodness, you guys just show up and you go to where all the biggest action is in the region. Well, that seems like a good job to have, you know?
Get into games and rock concerts?
Yeah, and more than that, like the reporter puts a thing, is like, oh, you're going to go to this thing. And whatever it is, it's newsworthy and you're going to be there. That's pretty fun. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, my friends used to tease me in graduate school, you're lining the better bird cages in Utah County with the newsprint.
Oh, yeah. Well, but, it's a lot of fun to do. And it's a shame. If newspapers still existed, I would be doing that job.
Well,
I know that.
And you know what? I'll tell you, the old cliche from Superman about that crusty old editor.
Yeah.
I had an editor sit me down and he goes, I know you're writing poetry. I know you're going to want to write creative writing and stuff. But he goes, this ain't creative writing. And you're going to do it my way. And you're going to do it right. And you're going to do it fast. And I want it like this. And he showed me and he goes, I'm going to give you 1 week. And he ripped it to pieces. And then I figured out what he wanted. And so I learned how to crank it out fast.
Well, honestly, I think that's a really important skill. In fact, Woody Allen in an interview, he did he wrote comedy for some garbage comedy club, nightclub or something. And he said, people think that's not a big deal, but that actually taught me to write and not wait for the muse. Like to have a deadline of like, oh, you need something funny tonight. Yeah. And so you have to do it. And I
when
think
you've got
that's
a column, if you've got a column due, I just learned that in school, I could take weeks. If I had a paper due on the 12th, I would start it on the 1st.
Yeah.
And in the real world, you have to do it and you just have to have it done. So, yeah. But anyway, so that is a skill you have to develop, and it only needs to be, I dare not say this probably without being the one who lined the bird cages in Utah County, but it just needs to be good enough if you've got a deadline.
No, exactly. Well, they need that because you gotta realize, like, especially if you're an editor, and this applies to film producers, like your work is not their only concern. They've got a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Like if they've got maybe 5 projects or 10 projects similar to yours they're overlooking, and they have a boss, and if they don't fill that space, they're not going to get in trouble if it's not genius. They're going to be in trouble if it's not there.
Yeah.
And so you really need to do that. And they have a lot of things after you finish their job that they need to do. Like they need for print, graphic designers, layout, typography, whatever. And back in the day, printing presses and so on. And with videos, post-production is at least as much work as production.
Right.
So if you're involved in film shoots, whatever you're thinking, all the hard work you're doing on film shoot, an equal amount of work is going to happen after you're done shooting.
Yeah.
So you've got to have it done on time, or else the whole thing begins to fall apart.
And you're not that important if you can't get it done. I mean, they'll take time to teach you, but you've got to learn fast.
Yeah. Or they'll fire you.
And and then you're out of work.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's missed by students. Because again, it's like, and even it's maybe even kind of a fiction, like that's maybe even propagated. Like there's one name on the book, but there's a lot of people involved in that book, So it's, So you just, and it's funny. And that's the whole point, is that looks effortless. Like, you're watching like Werner Herzog's Grizzly Man. I can tell you probably 200 very talented people worked on that,
Right.
But it just looks effortless.
But
it looks like it's just
crafted. But somebody that does their job well makes it look effortless, and then someone thinks, "Oh, I can do that," and you can't do it. Try it.
Yeah.
But the back story is a lot of sweat.
Yeah.
And it does take hard knocks.
Oh,
but you should do it.
Oh no, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And that's the difference between a professional and amateur, is really just being able to get stuff in on time and be able to do it.
Deadlines are king.
Yeah. Garbage in hand is better than nothing.
Yeah.
And so. And
it's true in corporate America too. You could spend all day writing 2 emails, or you can answer 50.
Yeah. Yeah. And in tying back to the rejection thing on volume, like I think, like, to me, in my experience, like one rejection hurts. Like if you send something out and you're like really hoping, and then 2 months later you get a rejection, that hurts. If you're sending stuff out all the time, 50 rejections, you don't even notice. Like, it's just because you always have something new out there, something new, a hope. And again, and it's just like, you're going to get, it only takes one bite and you're happy.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have all your eggs on like one thing, like, well, I wrote a novel, I sent it to this one editor, I'm going to wait a year. And before you know it, you're over.
Well,
life's over.
And the backstory of this is that all on that roll of, I don't know what you call it when you plastic it, but every one of those rejections all turned into a book that made more than I made teaching.
Oh, yeah.
And they rejected it for reasons. And I have a really good friend who's an advertiser. We talked a little bit about advertising before post show. And he's a brilliant marketer. And one day he asked me to teach him on fly fish. He married my wife's best friend. And he said, I said, hey, I can't get this book sold. And he looked at it and he goes, you've got the headings wrong. And driving up to the fly fishing river that we were going to, Strawberry River, he took a pen and he spent 10 minutes and he redid the titles and the bullet points and the subheads. And I sent that same thing off to every place that had been rejected that year. And I got 3 positive takes in out of 10 letters. And so I negotiated 3 different books on the same subject.
See, exactly.
And it was just simply reshifting. And I think the planets aligned, because you need to make a case for your case. Yeah. You have to be able to, you fight to tell the story.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, it's a lot of things. Again, this is being more on the other side. Like, something that came across your desk a year ago may not have fit, but if it comes next, and 2 years later, oh, that's just what I need. And also, if you've received a lot of rejection letters, you realize there's like a gradation of rejection.
Yeah. You're rejected by perhaps somebody that's just shifting in the old days.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, and also don't take it personally, because it's probably just a poor match. I mean, again, and
it's the need at the moment. The editor has certain needs, and those needs shift. And so if you fill a need, or if you build the case properly and they do look at it, but half the time, 3/4 of the time, I think it's like a resume. You can tune. I've taught lots of resume courses. You can tune your resume to get in the top 10% every time.
Yeah.
or you can be in the 90 or 80% that get rejected by someone that doesn't even make the decision.
Yeah, the way it gets passed up.
Yeah.
And I mean, it could be like, oh, well, if you're doing wildlife writing, like, oh, we did a thing on trout fishing last month.
Right,
So,
yeah.
and we have one scheduled, And also, but the gradation is, the worst is kind of just like a form letter where it's just like, it's just boilerplate and nobody did it. The next level up is boilerplate with like maybe a scribble on it, like, we actually like this paragraph or something. And that's pretty good. And weirdly, those rejection letters you really want to keep.
Right.
Because they bothered to do that. You think how many submissions they get. That they really liked it, actually.
There's several editors that said, if you do this, we'll take your stuff. And many of them in the early days said, we take your text. The photos aren't good enough that you submitted.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is how we want it done. And I changed, and then I started, selling more. But I appreciated that. And that editor is still alive, and I still send him a thank you note.
No, seriously, because I mean, they saw enough in you. And again, they see so many. If they wait, they're using any of their time, their precious time, to help you, just a random person who sent something in. They liked it and they saw something there.
Yeah.
And you'll want to follow up with them later. You'll want to send them something else.
And you sell back to that same person dozens of times.
If they like you, it's an ongoing relationship.
Deal. Yeah. I sold, textbooks. I sold many of the same textbooks in my deviation into textbooks when we were having all this internet anxiety over publishing. And I just launched in a new direction, which is textbooks. And many of the same editors, they go, oh, I like what you did. Can you do the same thing again, but do this? Or you'd say, I want this, but I want that.
Yeah.
And it's the deadline.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's quality text and a deadline. And I don't know that that's changed. I think that's still true. Even digitally, you still have to fill up the space. Yeah.
In fact, I'm going to tell, this is somewhat a painful story, even now, but it happened early in my career before I really knew how this worked. I sent out a story proposal to O Magazine, which is Oprah Magazine.
Oh, yeah.
It's it was the biggest magazine by far in circulation for women. So it was massive. And I sent out the story proposal, and I'm just driving along, and I get a call. I'm like, oh, New York. Answer. I'm like, hi, I'm an editor at Oprah Magazine. I really liked your story proposal, but we kind of do that kind of stuff more in-house. But I just wanted to know, but I really liked your proposal. I looked at your website. I really liked your work. And that is that. And I was just like, oh, well, that's great. Well, thanks for calling. Hang up. I mean, we ended the conversation, and I was like, and it wasn't until a year later, I was like, oh my goodness, that was a real opportunity. I have an editor from Oprah Magazine calling me, and I didn't get her name, her email, say, how can I follow up? What other stories are you interested in? I didn't do any of that. And again, because when you're younger, you just think these opportunities are coming all the time. You don't even have enough rejection to realize a call from an editor from a major magazine is a huge deal. Oh, yeah. So anyway, there you go. Learn from my mistake.
And I did the same thing. A person said, again, I was out in the field, will you shoot this for me? And he was a wild, can't remember the publication, it was a real important wildlife publication. I didn't get his name or him or her. And
see, there you go.
I was very young, and that was a mistake.
Yeah. So anything you follow, so really just keep any sort of communication you have.
And send them a thank you note.
Send them a thank you note. They appreciate that. Send them a flyer. Send them something you worked on for somebody else, like a tear out, or I guess tear out, that's an old term, but something you printed with somebody
and just
else.
Tell them thanks for taking the time, and then 2 weeks later say, oh, I appreciated your time, and then hit them with something else.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Or do what I did, change your name. Because I wrote some articles because I thought, oh, I'm going to try this. And they go, we can't do this because you're not a woman. And so I changed my name to Michelle.
Well, there you go.
And it worked.
There you go.
But I guess that maybe that was.
Well, no,
I was really
fine.
desperate for even a $10.
When you get paid for, when you first start getting paid for what you're doing, I remember I think my first check was $400 for something. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is magic. I actually made money, so, but yeah. And then after a while, you realize it takes a lot of $400 checks to make a living. Right. So that's where syndication, I guess, was the key. So
just be thick-skinned.
Yeah, thick-skinned.
Even now, it's easier to get published writing and photos, film, whatever. Now you can find a medium.
Yeah,
medium. I should know that. I'm an English professor, but whatever. but nevertheless, you've got to just keep at it.
Well, I mean, honestly, I mean, this even applies to social media. Like, you have to like post a lot of stuff, and then you'll have one thing that like just kind of hits. You know, I mean,
and the timing is, you know, I tried that where I calibrated the timing on days and stuff.
Yeah.
I grew up spoiled in the print world, and so I've already done okay. But boy, every piece of data, this is a data-driven world.
Yeah.
And you know, when I was at Qualtrics, I just learned, you know, so much about data where you just take all that information and you just use it.
Oh, yeah. In fact, that's actually something I want to talk about. So he's done a bunch of technical writing as well, and he's been part of two of the most influential tech companies, like WordPerfect in the early days.
But I did some stuff.
No, you were around. I mean,
the subsequently shifted into education.
Yeah, so just a little history for people who might not be aware. So WordPerfect, before Microsoft Word, WordPerfect had like 80% market share. It was the word processing software, and it was founded by just like a university professor and his English major student. Like, it's just random. They did a program for the Orem city government, and then they just started selling it, and it became huge. Yeah.
And we all used it.
Yeah. So, I mean, what is it like writing for tech companies? And I mean, is there like there's got to be, of course, a very different culture than editorial writing.
Right. And I started just doing that as it's not quite on paper, but basically I double majored in graduate school.
Yeah.
But I just learned that I love outdoor writing. I love photography, but there's a lot more money teaching people how to write in business than there is anywhere else.
Oh, yeah. So they have all the money. They have a lot of money, those guys.
But you can't do that if you don't also do business writing.
Of course, yeah.
Or regular writing. And so I did both.
Yeah.
But I just started, companies that we don't even hear of anymore, Signetics, WordPerfect. I did some for Word. Indirect.
Do you do any for like Novell and stuff?
Yeah. I did workshops for all those. The professor I was talking to you about, John S. Harris.
Yeah.
When I was young, we shared a lot of similar interests in the outdoors, and he took me consulting, and he paid me half of what he was being paid, and he said, "This is how you do it." And he took me in, and so I've always felt a real gratitude for how, you know, some teachers are better than others, but some go out of their way to just mentor you.
Yeah.
And I said, John, how can I ever pay you back? And he goes, just find some people every year and mentor them. And so you kind of pass that on.
Mm-hmm.
You're still playing God maybe, but, and you're picking people, but the way you pay back that mentor is to mentor someone else.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've always thought that was interesting. That's why I like to teach. I've always thought teaching was fun, but this isn't really work.
No, it's a
this
blast.
Is fun.
Yeah.
But certainly, corporate America has certain demands, and you have to learn what those are.
Yeah,
and
they have a different aesthetic, different goals,
right? And
they have people they're answering to as well,
right? And
anybody
so
you interface with.
It's what do you want? And I've governed my entire professional career, and this is how, in some ways, how I can afford to take 100 days a year off.
Yeah,
is I do some consulting, and there's 5 principles that drive all writing and all communication.
Yeah,
and that is audience, purpose.
Yeah.
The most important needs to be the most obvious and most upfront, and make, go from general to specific, and don't use 50-cent words if you can use a 5-cent word.
Oh, yeah. No.
And make it look good. And that governs those principles, which John taught me.
Yeah.
Governed my entire professional career. Who's your audience? Did you know that I did some research one time, and I did some workshops on this? 60% of all corporate documents fail on a measurable level.
Yeah.
And guess what? Out of that 60%, 60% are geared to the wrong audience.
Oh, yeah.
And now it's more important than ever because we've split the audiences. It used to be the general audience, like you'd print your resume. Now it's tailored to every little specific need because we can do that because of the internet and digital technology. And so you've got to be so careful. Used to advertise soap to whoever was buying it. Now you're advertising from different angles to different perspectives and different people, and you have to be so careful. So people would say, how come my document failed? Take Qualtrics, for example, where where something wasn't working, and we could go in and we'd just look and say, your audience is wrong. You're trying to sell something to somebody or give them a product that they don't need, or that they don't know they need, and you haven't built the case.
Yeah.
And so my job was, in fact, every time I've ever done, embarrassingly, I've written a bunch of ghost novels, but I wrote when I was in graduate school. We were so broke, we didn't even have a couch.
Yeah.
I wrote 2 romance novels because the person was sick, and they said, "Can you do this? And we'll pay you 30 days to read these books." Because in those days, like, someone would write like 20 books a year or something.
Oh, yeah.
And under different names. And I said, okay. And so I did it. And all I did was look at the audience, and I looked at what they were doing, and I just transferred that. And that's how you make it in business.
No, it's
you
true.
have to do exactly what the reader needs. If I'm trying to sell you a camera, I need to know what your needs are. And if you're a wildlife photographer, you may not need camera X.
Oh, yeah.
You may need camera Y.
Yeah.
And those are the things. And that is so often overlooked.
Think of how you can solve a problem for the person you're talking to. Yeah.
And not create a problem. So what I do is, like I said, in my 3-sentence resume, which I went to for the last 15 years, is basically, I will solve the problem, and I will make sure it's in on time and done right. Yeah. And then I'm going to take a long, expensive vacation. No. And I only work I've been able to pick and choose my jobs most of the time. But you couldn't at first. You had to take everything. I mean, you did a lot of work you didn't want to do when you were starting.
No, of course. And I hear clients say, like, I'm like, "Oh, what are you going to shoot?" And they're like, "Oh, just a mine in Nevada or something." Or, I mean, I'm like, "What do you mean? That's awesome. You got a job, you're being paid, and it's great." And the money difference between editorial and stuff that's fun and commercial is huge. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like, for example, at Getty, it was $600 a day to do an editorial shoot, which may syndicate, so you could do better over the long term, but that's an if. And then a commercial shoot would be $5,000 a day. Yeah. And so again, it takes, actually, if you think about it, a number of $5,000 a day to make a living, but it's doable. But without the $5,000 days, you're not doing the other, because $600 a day, you would just run yourself ragged. It's impossible.
In ad stuff, they'd call me from New York or LA, and because I knew what they were doing, and they'd explain, we need this, because I have kind of a site specific thing, and that we need it by 7:00 in the morning, New York time. Yeah. And so you're up all night, but that paid for a lot of film.
Yeah. Well, no, especially like the coast. I mean, a lot of the media centers still control a lot of stuff, and they're the decision makers. And on the converse side, I think of a few times, like, getting a call from an editor after you turn something in is always a heartbeat moment. You're like, shoot, there's something wrong.
but business just has to function, and you have to be effective, but you also have to just get it right. You might be given a second chance, but you got to kind of get it right the first time. But you can't use the aesthetics you learned in graduate school. It doesn't always transfer to the pragmatics of the real world. There's the world of work, and then there's the world of aesthetics. And I can afford to wait around for aesthetics if I don't have a real market. And I'm out there writing a poem. But like I said, for $2 in a handful of poems, I can buy a Diet Coke. Yeah. But I can buy a lot if I take that same time and refocus it. The problem is you just can't get stuck in the rut. You have to say, for my life, I made agreement with myself, 4 to 5 months a year, I was going to work on my own projects no matter what. And I've always made it clear wherever I was working, June, July, and August, I might do a quick project or columns or something, but I wasn't working on big projects. And when I did textbooks, I made it very clear to my co-writers, I wasn't working. Yeah. The end of May, I was in Canada at the end of May for 20 years doing bears.
Oh, great.
So, but I just made that clear. That was a clear differentiation. Yes, I'm not making the money, but I'm working on my own stuff.
Oh,
that's invigorating, because you can't work on someone else's project you can, I guess, but I can't.
No. And more than that, I think that's an amazing thing. You've stayed excited about your mediums for your whole career. And I mean, you see people burn out. Like there was I won't name the newspaper because this is a kind of embarrassing story. There was a guy there who was staff. He was one of 15 staff photographers. And he just started putting his son in the background of all of his photos. And he would take the most terrible photos. And he just showed up with his son, stuck him in the photo, and then left. He didn't work at all. And he finally caught up to him. But because of the union or contract, they couldn't get rid of him. But they stuck him on desk duty. But honestly, I don't think he cared. He was just so done with shooting. Yeah. And it's like the dream job is so many people want is competitive, but somehow he burned himself out on it.
Well, and companies will burn you out. In fact, somebody we both know, no names, but he calls it the big plate theory. Yeah. When you come in, he would say, you define your career and your vertical momentum by the next 5 years. And it's called the big plate. I'm going to stack. I mean, he's a millionaire. Yeah. A billionaire, actually, probably. I don't know why.
Maybe you just gave it away there, but yeah.
But the bottom line is, he said, I will put as much on your plate as you can handle.
Yeah.
You have to decide how you're going to do it. And it will influence your vertical momentum, but you also have to know when you have to back up.
Yeah.
And that's something I can't decide. I'll give you as much work as you can possibly do.
Yeah.
I'll keep you busy 18 hours a day. But when you say, hey, look, I got to back up, I get it. Because I'm backing up. I'm off to France for the next 4 months.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, it's way refreshed. In fact, even I'm going to reach back here and grab a camera. There was a time in my career where like an SLR, digital SLR, just began to feel like work. And I don't know what it's like. I picked it up and I was like, this feels like work. And so I bought a new kind of camera. It was a Rolleiflex twin lens, which is, kind of older style camera, different. And all of a sudden it was fun. And I like the novelty of the new camera and the new way of looking. And I kind of just, I shot a couple of projects with it. Great. And I was back in love again, So, I mean, whatever it takes, if it it means just kind of, it could be a simple thing as switching up what kind of camera you're using. Or I've meet clients who they like shooting chemical film. They find kind of recreational because they work so much with digital professionally. Of course it is, yeah. Using a fountain pen, for example.
Yeah. And I've taught typing and I've written books on word processing and I still love the tactile experience of the pen. Yeah. But this is one reason too why when I shifted out of magazines and newspapers, I still did some. Yeah. I didn't go right into the new. I did some stuff for ESPN in very early days, outdoor stuff, but they wanted a 40-week commitment. And I had a very young family and I just didn't want to make that. We had new kids and we were excited and I didn't want to make that commitment where I could control my life. So I switched into books, which is like 20 articles with a little more research.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But also you have a longer tail, like they're making money for a longer period of time.
But I knew magazines were a dying medium.
Yeah. I also just started paying less.
Well, in fact, I made as much, my article, for example, I think 1980 in Outdoor Life or something, the date is probably wrong, but it's close. I made as much on a one-page article as I did on a longer article 15 years later.
Yeah.
It was reflecting.
No, even like, I mean, I haven't looked at rates recently, but like even a 5,000 word article, which is a really long one for like a major magazine like Esquire would pay like $2,000.
Yeah.
I mean, it was and that they're really hard to pull that off.
Right. But if you want, it's also though, if you need it as a career move, I would say like when I did the stuff for A&E, I did not care about the money. And frequently I've done jobs that I knew would launch me and pivot me into another position. And so the money wasn't as important as the resume. Yeah. Which sounds cold, but the reality is I knew I didn't negotiate much for a salary. I just did it because for the rest of my life I have A&E.
Yeah.
And it launched into other things. But
no, I mean, the exposure would be worth it. Yeah.
And it's the same way with the newspapers. I lined the better bird cages of Utah County, right? But every 5 or 6 articles I was able to turn into a magazine article. And I've since turned those into other things. And so it just launched into the next. So it's okay not to make as much. But the other thing is you got to mix up your career.
Yeah.
I want to write in all the genres because I'd be bored doing the same thing all the time.
Yeah.
I like playing in genres.
Yeah.
So, and cameras too.
No, I mean, diversity.
Wildlife is my favorite, but I love landscape.
Yeah, no, and you probably meet, I mean, this is something even I've encountered. Like, you're like, All filmmakers probably experience this. It's like you meet a lawyer, an accountant. They're like, "You do what?" And they're like, "What a dream!" And in your head, you're like, "I don't know about that." But you got to realize, like, for them, it's just so different and exotic. But you've done it enough that it's beginning to feel like being an accountant. But actually, you think their job is much more routine, much more boring. But just mix it up. Honestly, even like to me, just doing some manual labor, like helping somebody move or just something where you feel like a real impact, and that's just a writing thing.
Well, it's going from history or armchair history to travel to business.
Different subject matters.
And I did some HBR ghostwriting.
Yeah.
Just a few things. It was just mixed it up. But I also used my camera at work. And so I used it as a vehicle in corporate America. So I was able to keep from getting bored.
Yeah.
And create a new market for myself, a non-traditional market. But it worked. But you see, you've played in the genres.
No, it's a lot of fun. But hey, I want to talk about your teaching for a bit. I mean, Michael Rutter was actually my high school creative writing teacher, and I got to tell you, like he generated a tremendous amount of English majors. I don't know what I do know what it was. People really came out loving writing, and I was wondering if. I mean, I have a theory, kind of how it is. I may tell you like what the perspective of my class was as a student, and but I mean, is it like planned or like
I tell it for free. I charged about $2,000 for a faculty meeting.
Oh yeah,
I hate that, but I loved people are going to pay me to do poetry and write with kids and stuff. That's warming up my day, so I could go home and write. But I loved it. I think maybe too that I had some teachers that just made incredible differences.
Yeah.
And so, as John had said, it's the payback. Take one of the great rushes of my life besides standing down a bear would be having some kid that goes, "I don't read," and he goes, "I read Huck Finn. It was okay." That's like the great payoff.
Yeah.
The great payoff. Or I just read a French symbolist poetry.
Yeah.
I do that weird stuff. Or I teach T.S. Eliot to third graders.
Oh, great.
And they'd go, "Oh, April is the cruelest." And to me, that was just such a wonderful payback that I did. I don't know what your theory is, but I also started off as really non-traditional ADHD sort of. School was not my thing. I was outdoors with animals. I played with animals all the time.
Yeah.
And dogs and cats and bears and deer. And in fact, I even lassoed a black-tailed deer and when I was 12, and I had the rope tied to my wrist. And I read it in Daniel Boone, or my mother read it to me or something. And I put a lasso over it, and it pulled me out of the tree. But those kinds of things. So I really liked that. But school was not pleasant. I hated school. I loved to learn.
Yeah.
My parents always took me to the library, bought me art supplies. I drew, I painted, and I figured I can either clean stalls or I can become an oil painter. Not a great oil painter, but definitely it's better than cleaning stalls.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, like the way you structured your class, and again, you can correct me, but this is my recollection. I thought it was really great. Like, first of all, you kind of talked about, because it was a creative writing, like poetry, kind of talked about popular music bit, showed some popular music there, met the students where they were at. Because in a way, popular music is where high school students are going to get poetry stuff. And then later on, you kind of say, like, this is fun, but it's not really the real deal. When the kids are ready for that and kind of transition to like, the major poets. But the thing was, there was like an enthusiasm behind it. So it's kind of like writing is fun, poetry's fun, this is fun, like just reading it. And then it was writing is fun, reading your writing for other people is fun. So the whole thing was just fun. Like you turned it, rather than like turning it like most classes, which are kind of, these are the assignments and this is how we're going to progress in our skill level and so on. It was sold by being fun. And your enthusiasm for the medium, I think, carried through with it.
It has to be fun, or I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, exactly. But you can bother to communicate that.
Well, and I suppose too that I'm just basically just a big kid, and as my wife says, I'm barely housebroken. So I think that there's so many interesting things out there, and you can't let people define your life for you. You can't let people label you. You have to do it yourself. you go out and do it. And you can't just say, well, you're a third grader, so you can't read T.S. Eliot, or you're in high school, so you're not going to read Baudelaire or modern.
Well, and that's another thing. You
have
let
to
you
do
took,
it all.
You took them seriously, and you said there's no reason why you can't interact with.
And
the
you can
stuff.
always rewrite it. So if it's not right, if you don't get full credit, rewrite it. Oh, you're almost there. I did that at BYU too a lot. Is that in my classes, you turn in your paper after 2 months, and this is your grade on this paper. Now, these are the 27 things you need to do to get an A. Bring it back in a week. And so writing is a series of progressionary steps. You can't, I think it's absurd to say, I suppose you have to make a grade, but you can't just say, you're going to learn to write, and here it is, turned in. You have to be able to rewrite it. You have to be able to know you can put yourself out on a limb, and you're not going to be crucified or cut off if it's not quite right.
Yeah.
And so you're right.
Well, you make a safe environment for people to write in, right?
Well, and I suppose it's because I didn't have a safe environment.
Yeah. So you wanted to give what you didn't have. Yeah.
Well, and some teachers, though, I can name them still, and in college also, were very kind. I had a teacher, Jean Ann Waterstrat, who was very strict. But one day she said, "You don't read it very well." I said, "Yeah, I really love this." It was a class in Shakespeare, and I'd grown up with Shakespeare. I loved it. And my father read it, and my mother, and we lived by the Oregon Shakespearean Festival, and I said, "Yeah, if I could read better, and I'm starting to really read now, I would become an English major. Instead, I'm going to graduate," and I can't remember what it was, sociology, law, whatever in those days was easy.
Yeah.
And just get the degree. And she said, "Mr. Rutter," she always called me Mr. Rutter, but I could call her Jean Ann.
Yeah.
And Phil knows her quite well, too, our friend Phil. Your mom probably knew her, but she said, "Are you willing to come in once or twice a week and have me tear your stuff apart?" I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "Do you know what a thesis is?" I go, "Not really. I don't even understand those terms." And she worked me through once or twice a week. I bring stuff in, and after her class, I got a B- or a B in her class, and she worked me through. So I started to understand what was going on. But it was an environment where I knew I could rewrite it, and I wasn't looking stupid, and she let me do it.
Yeah.
And so she goes, "Are you ready to be an English major?" And I said, "Yeah, but I don't know any of the terms. I didn't learn any of this because I basically skipped most of high school."
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Well, you can do this." And so I switched to English, and it was like 25 times worse than switching from Nikon to Sony. It was horrid. I had to, but great, because it was a massive learning curve. And then all of a sudden I thought, oh, and I had teachers that made such a difference, where they go, "You don't understand this. Let me explain it to you. This paper isn't right. Rewrite it." And so that is how I learned. And I suppose I said, we preach how we learn. And I suppose that I learned in that kind of environment. So I wanted to create that where you didn't have to be an AP student to read Shakespeare or Milton or Donne.
Yeah.
You could do it, and we would go slow and easy. And not only that, you would be writing like it, and then you would read it. And if it sucked, you could rewrite it.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of my thesis. And every year I thought, this is my last year. I don't need this. This is not very, teachers don't make very much money. You make a lot more consulting. And so I thought, oh, and so it was fun. And so every year get to do this. And so I did. And then I turned that into a lab for textbook too. And so I reconditioned myself, but I didn't report to the parents. I reported to the kids. That was who I reported to. Yeah. I mean, I love the parents, and most of them were so wonderful. And I had great support from the principals, but I learned something too. And that is, if your kids pass tests really well, you can do whatever you want. Yeah. You can't nowadays. High school has become scripted. And so is public school has become scripted. I'm sorry, but that's a whole nother subject. But nevertheless, though, it was, for me, it was like a big thrill was just saying, like I said, that kid that didn't read who read Huck Finn. And I would buy 25 Huck Finn classic comic books. And I don't get this. And I'd send them back to my office and go read the comic book. And then we'll come back. So you have to start. It doesn't do any good to try and teach somebody what the script says. Yeah. If they're reading on the third grade, you got to do this. So I wrote several books, and the money of those from the profit from those books went right back into my reading programs.
Yeah.
Because I needed to fund it. Run of the Arrow was totally redirected back into reading programs for kids that fit not into the system.
Yeah.
They weren't quote special ed, whatever that means, and they weren't regular, but they were like ADHD or whatever that means, or just not reading. And so we just started back, and I went back to elementary school. My wife's in elementary. She went back to college after I did. And I learned that if we want to teach reading and writing, we need to go back and teach it the way they taught in elementary school, not the way we teach it in English in high school. I mean, it's still good, but it works for 70% of the student population. It doesn't work for everyone. So I went back and learned how they taught kids. And that's how I restructured a high school reading program and funded it.
No, it's fantastic. And like in the class I was in, like to me, like how you learn a medium is you read good stuff and then you write. Mm-hmm. And it's just, and you look at good photographs, and a big part of the teacher's job is to point like, this stuff is good. Mm-hmm. Trust me, read it. Mm-hmm. And because when you're out in the world, you just don't know, you're just reading whatever. And you're like, no, like Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath is actually really an amazing book. And you may not be able to fully realize this now, but once you've been in the medium for a while, you'll go back and read it and be like, oh my goodness, this really is an amazing book.
And start with the movie if you can't read the book.
Yeah, I start with the movie, but you would just give the kid us very good material to read, no limit, stuff that you probably could engage in a graduate course, but just threw them in, and then had deadlines and required them to produce writing. And not just like, well, at the end of this, we're going to write one poem. It's every week we have a poem. Or every this. Yeah. And so you get the volume of kind of like how to go. And that's a really great way to win. Yeah. And
you can, well, actually fail's not right. It's try new directions until you explore. And then the other thing is, you may not be able to write a sonnet, but maybe you can write something else. And so try it all.
Yeah, we tried different styles of poems.
And we did
different styles.
Were you in there when I did filmmaking?
No, it was probably too expensive. Cameras were cheap then.
We did video, where we wrote videos, and that was another whole fun adventure with creative writing too.
Yeah.
But I think in those days, I remember when I was working at Fish Lake, and one of the ESPN cameramen dropped his camera in the lake. It was $25,000, and that was like in the 80s.
So that'd be like 60, 70 now.
Yeah. So, but kids are fun. But you have to do stuff that you like, and that's important. But you also have to make a living. So there's sort of a balance.
Yeah. Well, again, it keeps people interested in the medium. And, even if you're, writing, other stuff, it's good to have. No, and again, it's the range. They can discover what they like. And also, again, I think it was like taking us seriously, giving us deadlines, write at volume. In fact, I think, and it's a big mistake I think a lot of teachers make, is they think by just standing up and talking, they're somehow going to convey writing, or they don't like bringing up like people who are really great at it. Like they want to be the best I see this in the visual art. They want to be the best illustrator in the room. And so they're not going to bring up other great illustrators, even though quite frankly, they're better illustrators, So, but, bringing up great writing, showing it, and exposing them to it, and then having deadlines for them to create it. That's a great combination. And be enthusiastic. I view it like being a cheerleader, and you were an excellent cheerleader.
I think that
cheerleader, keep writing, keep reading.
In fact, somebody that I think wrote to me today and just said, how many students have published books? And I said, I can think of 80.
Of your students?
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
And on various levels. And some are. I love it. To me, a student's success in the professional world is whatever in writing or whatever is my success. I celebrate. I celebrate that, when I celebrate.
Yeah, well,
but I really, you go out and do the best you can, and I love it. Become a Pulitzer Prize winner. I'm on your side, and I'm the cheerleader.
No, that's great. In fact, my next door neighbor who grew up next door to me has published, I think, 5 poetry books, quite a few with good publishers. Catherine,
Coles. Oh,
Yeah.
I know her well.
Yeah,
she
she
was
does
my
really
student.
good work. Yeah, she was your student.
Yeah,
Yeah, she was a
she's
very good friend of mine.
Wonderful
growing up.
poet. Oh,
yeah.
I love her work. By the way, Catherine, if you're out there, I've got a fox picture. Just write a poem and it's yours.
There you go. Perfect. So, well, anyway, I think we covered everything I wanted to talk about, but thanks for sitting down with me, Michael. That was a really great interview. And,
Well, thank you.
Go check out, I'm going to hold these up. Go check out his books. I'm sure they're available.
Amazon probably
Amazon's probably the easiest, but I've seen them in
local
bookstores across the country.
These are in southern Utah all over. This one has been. This is if you're coming to Utah, and actually
off the beaten path.
Yeah, that is updated periodically, but this one will tell you lots of fun places.
Okay, yeah,
fun places to go, and I think I've taken that through 7 editions.
Oh wow! So yeah,
but it's simple, and if you love rock art, Native American art, pictograph, petroglyphs, and stuff, and I know.
Yeah,
we love those.
Yeah,
they'll tell you where some neat places are, and some if you don't get out of the car much, and you're like me, and in your 70s. You can walk only a couple hundred yards.
Yep, and again, we only got to a few of them, but he has published like 40 books and a lot of great ones on Western history. And so just look him up and click on that author link, and you'll see a bunch of other great stuff we really haven't been able to touch on. It really is amazing how much he's done. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming.